Lecture, we're going to head down south, the spine of the Rockies, until we reach the Colorado Plateau and visit the Grand Canyon, which is in Utah and Arizona. The Colorado River cuts a real striking path across the Southwest. It starts in Colorado, in the Rockies, eroding away the west side of the mountains. Essentially, it's a partner to the Mississippi River, both of them tearing away this massive mountain range. The Colorado River cuts down across Utah and then widens out into beautiful Lake Powell, which is dammed up by the Glen Canyon Dam. The river then cuts across the top of Arizona, where the Grand Canyon National Park is located. And near Las Vegas, it opens up into another striking lake, like Lake Mead, dammed up by Hoover Dam. It heads down south. It defines the western border of Arizona with Nevada, California, and part of Mexico, and finally ends up in the Gulf of California. Now, if Mount Fuji in Lecture 2 defines and symbolizes the landscape of Japan, the Grand Canyon, with its size and colors and stunning appearance, serves the same role for America. The Grand Canyon became the 15th national park of the United States, largely because of the support of two presidents, Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. As far back as 1901, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway completed a branch line into the Grand Canyon Village at the South Rim, and tourism began. In 1903, Teddy Roosevelt visited and was so struck that as soon as he got back to Washington, he began efforts to make this a national monument, which it became in 1908. However, there was a lot of resistance from mining companies who didn't want to be locked out from mining in the canyon, so it actually took 11 more years until 1919, with the help of Woodrow Wilson, for the Grand Canyon to become a national park. People had lived there a long time. Native Americans had lived in the area for about 4,000 years. I had the pleasure of being able to hike along the Grand Canyon for a week at one point. We started at the South Rim and headed down the Bright Angel Trail, and then hiked east and north to a juncture with the Little Colorado River and back. And all along the way, we found evidence of the native Anasazi peoples who had lived there. Pottery, arrowheads, even metates, the flat stones that they ground their corn on. But Europeans didn't see this until 1540. It was actually the Spanish explorer Coronado and his men who were traveling about the Southwest looking for the fabled 7 golden cities of Cibola. They never found them, of course, though Coronado did spend years marching around the Great Plains looking for gold. They left disgusted, and really no more Europeans visited the canyon area for about the next 200 years. The Grand Canyon was rediscovered by Europeans in the mid-1800s, however, and in 1869, Major John Wesley Powell led the first expedition down the Grand Canyon. He had 9 men with him, 4 boats, and food to last for almost a year. They left from Green River, Wyoming in May, went through various dangerous rapids, flowed into the Colorado River near present-day Moab, Utah, and then spent the next 3 months going through the Grand Canyon. Powell was amazed by what he saw. Spectacular features, the equivalent of which did not exist anywhere else in the country. Tall carved walls, incredible arches, deep glens, alcoves, gulches, mounds, monuments. Now, it wasn't an easy journey. They lost 1 boat that smashed in the rapids, and 3 men left the expedition in the middle and were never heard from again, mysteriously. But Powell came back again in 1871 and 72 with another expedition, and he made accurate maps of the canyon and brought a photographer with him, John Hillers. The photographer was really important because the photographs that were released captured the public's attention and eventually led to getting the Grand Canyon declared a national park. Other people came as well with all sorts of other ideas. In 1879, Robert Stanton traveled through, photographing every single bend of the river, hoping to put a train track in along the bottom of the canyon, which obviously never happened. But a lot of people have visited since. In fact, the Grand Canyon is one of the most visited landscapes anywhere in the world. Up to as many as 5 million people visit it per year. And about 40,000 people per year will camp overnight, like I did. Now, Starting in 1926, Route 66 became a major road that connected Chicago and Los Angeles. It went through St. Louis, Tulsa, Amarillo, Santa Fe, Albuquerque, and Flagstaff, Arizona, which is close to the Grand Canyon. So starting in about the 1950s, Route 66 became a major tourist route, carrying people to the Grand Canyon in great numbers. Now, there are a lot of spectacular canyons around the world, especially in very mountainous areas, but there are remarkably few that are like the Grand Canyon. It's often the case that a spectacular mountain range will have a spectacular deep valley cutting through them. When you visit, you're emotionally prepared for what you see, however. I mean, you can see the mountains from a great distance as you approach. The Grand Canyon is different. You drive for a long time across a really flat plateau, frankly, with not much to see but the trees right ahead of you. And then you turn a bend and the bottom drops out. And this incredible display of shapes and colors opens up in front of you, stretching up to 18 miles across the canyon in places, up to a mile deep. And as far as the eye can see in either direction, the Grand Canyon is 277 miles long. It stands out even when viewed from space. Now, there are canyons around the world that are much deeper than a mile, and even some that are much wider and longer, but not one of them has the visual impact of the Grand Canyon. A big part of this is how suddenly deep and wide the canyon is for a plateau that's otherwise very flat. And there's an interesting story here that I'll get to in a moment. Another reason that the Grand Canyon is so striking is the appearance of the rocks within the canyon. First of all, the rocks are all extremely exposed, so it's visually stunning. I mean, instead of just seeing green forest, you get an amazing display of colors, reds, yellows, oranges, and browns. Partly because the area is generally very dry, but it's also because the canyon is very young, at least geologically speaking, if you can call 5 million years young, which it is to a geologist. This is a very unusual occurrence that we have to be able to explain to understand how the Grand Canyon came to exist. Now, the rocks along the sides of the canyon display layers that are exceedingly flat. And right off, this is very different from the rocks in most other mountain canyons, which show extensive folding of the rock layers due to the history of the mountain building process. This usually happens when continents have collided with each other in the past. The layers get deformed and folded. We don't see any of this here. The rocks in the Grand Canyon have led a fairly boring existence since their formation. There's little evidence of any folding and just a small amount of faulting. They've lain underground, essentially unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. And it's really a very long time that they've been there. The rocks at the top of the canyon are about 240 million years old. These are the youngest rocks of the canyon, just 250 million years old. When I hiked down the canyon floor, I had this strange sensation of being able to walk backwards in time. Every step I took down took me through rocks that formed at successively older times. By the time I got down near the bottom, I was walking on rocks that were over 500 million years old, 500 million. These rocks are the same as the ones we saw from the Cambrian period in the Burgess Shale. But at the very bottom, down by the river, I was in rock that was even older. Beneath the Cambrian rocks is a major unconformity. And an unconformity is a geologic term that means a gap in time. So in other words, you may have a situation where you deposit many layers of rock, successively younger, and then a period when those rocks get eroded away and you remove that layer. And then you may start depositing new layers, but you have a line there that represents a gap from the old rocks to the new rocks. And one line right across may represent an incredibly, sometimes unfathomably long amount of time. This is a photo that I took from when I visited the Grand Canyon, and you can see that line exists right across here. Up above here, we see the top of the plateau coming down from a quarter of a billion years to 540 million years, the time of that Cambrian explosion. And then all of a sudden you notice how the rocks underneath are tilted. Well, there's a line here that represents the boundary. There's a gap of time because the youngest rocks underneath are about 825 million years. So there's a 280 million year gap right in here. As you go deeper, these rocks become 1 billion years old, the Nankoweap Formation, 1.25 billion years old, the Unkar Group. And actually, it doesn't show up well here, but below that, there's another unconformity. And then you reach igneous and metamorphic rocks that are 1.7 to 2 billion years old. There's a gap of 500 million years. The very deepest rocks here, called the Vishnu Schist, are 2 billion years old, nearly half the age of the planet. So as you go down through the canyon, you cut through 1.5 billion years of time. Now the rocks here